It's okay. Let me put a little bit more. This is chapter 5. Let's get into it. It's a little heavy. The Great Escape, chapter 5. I had moved to Scottsdale, a suburb of Phoenix, in January of 1994, and by the summer of 1995, I was ready to be on my own. My father lived well, and for the first time, I was able to do things like go to the mall and actually shop. I was allowed to have friends and boyfriends over, and my dad was cool with everyone. I was free. There was no drama except every once in a while I would get grounded for staying out past curfew. I didn't mind that though because the punishment was deserved and it never lasted too long. Not to mention, this was a lot better than being beaten. All of my new friends came from wealthy households and were afforded the same privileges as me. We spent the scorching Arizona summers poolside at my house, barbecuing and listening to music. This was the life, and I was being spoiled. But the good times didn't last for long. My father married his live in girlfriend, Michelle, not long after I moved in. Less than a year later, my little sister Katie was born. Soon after that, my father's only son, Kenneth Jr., moved in with us from Maryland. My father had 4 other children, including Tony and Jennifer, who all previously lived in different states. My father's mother, Meryl, also lived at the house. It went from just me and my father to all these people who, while they were related to me, were nonetheless strangers. My dad became stressed, and my stepmom had problems adjusting to being a new mother. I spent most of my time taking care of the newest addition to our family, while Michelle worked her way through her issues. She would stay locked in her bedroom a lot. I remember my father not handling it very well. Soon, there were screaming matches between Michelle and my father. His attitude began to change and he started treating me differently. I no longer had the freedom to do things I had only just begun to enjoy. And even the simplest things, like getting my nails done, had now become an issue. Not surprisingly, money had become tight for my father, who was now responsible for a house full of people. The majority of all my allowance was cut off, and he was either unable or unwilling to do things for me he had done when I first came to live with him. As my father and Michelle argued, my grandmother often got into the middle, frustrated with all of the fighting. It became too much for me. Regardless of how well I'd been living, I was still very fragile. Although I had become accustomed to the good life, I still carried traces of my old life with me. During the summer, hi, oh, there's 9 people in here. Hello. During the summer after the 11th grade, I shoved a few belongings into a hefty bag, pocketed the $36.57 I had been saving, called a cab, and snuck out of my bedroom window. I threw the bag over the 6-foot high concrete wall around our home and hoisted myself over it, being careful not to jump into the cacti that lined the other side of the wall. And just like that, I was gone. The only plan I had was to get to a friend's apartment and stay there for the night. I would figure out the rest in the morning. It was such a crazy time for me. I don't remember much about where I was and what I did as I moved from place to place with friends and even strangers. I do remember feeling the way I felt living with my mother in Tampa. I would much rather been on the streets as a derelict than to feel the way I was in to than to feel like I was in the way. I had a boyfriend, Reggie, who was there for me. He had been on his own since he was 16 and his mother lived in New York where he grew up. He and his mother had moved to Phoenix years before, and when she went back to New York, Reggie opted to stay. He was my school love, and we spent every weekend and holiday break together. He didn't attend school and was essentially a hustler who lived in a bad neighborhood. I loved the excitement of knowing that I was with a bad boy. On many occasions, would we both be thrilled and terrified at hearing gunshots outside. Around the time that I left home, Reggie's mom came to visit. I was instantly drawn to her. She was pretty and funny and treated both me and Reggie as if we were adults. I moved in with Reggie and his mother. I moved in with Reggie and his mother, and her visit ended up being permanent. After hanging out with her for a while, she and I became friends. She said she knew a way I could make money to support myself now that I was a woman out on my own. I looked up to her and was happy to take her advice. It's funny how I had so much admiration for her as a girl at 16, but I can't remember her name now. Reggie's mom was a dancer at an all nude exotic dance club. Without asking for credentials, the manager allowed me to work there right away. The room was dark except for the stage and packed with Patreons. Hi. Their faces masked by cigarette smoke. As my turn approached, I was nervous. Hi. I was nervous. My heart was beating so fast and loud that I could not hear the music over its thumping. I tried to tune it all out and had to do it. I had to do it. I had to make it on my own. I went backstage to change into my outfit, and it was a white bikini with a matching sheer long robe. The outfit came highly recommended from Reggie's mom since white glowed in the dark under the club's black lights. The song I chose for my very first dance was Come Down by Bush. The chorus blared from the speakers. I don't want to come down from this cloud. It takes all this time to find out what I need. I would dance to Come Down every night as my first dance. In the moments just before I made my debut, Yazette Santiago, my alter ego, was born. In order to get up on the stage every night and dance like that, I loved, and I mean it, I needed to put forth the persona of a fearless woman. So the scared little girl who felt unworthy, unattractive, and unwanted was gone. In her place was Yazette, and a woman child who was everything Carrie wanted to be. Beautiful, sexy, confident, Corrine, sorry. Beautiful, sexy, confident, and independent. When I took these first couple of steps that led to the stage and the spotlight hit my body, the crowd began to cheer. It was all a blank. I performed without thought, and the movement came naturally to me. I got through it. I don't know what I did or how I did, but whatever I did was good enough for the crowd, that they went wild. The next thing I remember is holding all of my money and making my way off stage. Reggie's mother was there, waiting with open arms. You did so good, baby girl, she said. You were beautiful out there, and they love you. Now hurry up and count your money and get back out there. And that's what I did, night after night. Every night I was pulling down $1,000 at the club. I was doing well, but my relationship with Reggie's mother turned sour. She was in her mid-30s at the time, and it seemed as if her heyday was over. Mine, at 17, was just beginning. When she found out I was making substantially more money than her, she didn't like it. She began to take advantage of me and started charging me ridiculous amounts of rent and would even demand that I buy her things. Our friendly relationship turned into a jealous competition, and I was soon on the road again. On December 26, 1995, I had been shopping at the mall, taking advantage of my post-Christmas sales, and getting my nails done, when I received a call from an associate at another local strip club, an upscale place that most of the NFL and NBA players in Phoenix frequented. I had already dated one or two players from the Arizona Cardinals and was enjoying my run as one of the most popular dancers in the city. I was a center attraction and a main feature at the club. Your worth as a dancer is measured by how well you are able to hang upside down and spin from atop the 10-foot pole. It was equally important to know how to work the floor and pulsating to the music in front of the customers who lined at the stage. I was a champion in both areas. I racked up back-to-back table dances where I would cuddle and caress the upper bodies of the patrons. Some were strangers, but many were regulars. I had mastered a table dance trick, which was the unusual position into an unexpected handstand while wrapping my leg around my man's torso. It became my signature move. I was good at what I did, and I was paid accordingly. Our customers who paid very well exchanged numbers with me and called me one day to meet one customer who paid extremely well, exchanged numbers with me, and called me one day to meet him and a friend for a private dance session at his friend's house. This was something I did often. Private dances for Arizona Cardinal players at bachelor parties. They sent a chauffeur to fetch me from the mall. Where am I at? To watch me from the mall. I lost my train of thought. Fetch me from the mall. I walked up to the brand new two-story home, which stood directly in the center of a well cul-de-sac. I rang the doorbell. I could feel in my stomach how nervous I was about who would be answering the door. I really wasn't in the mood, but there was a lot of money at stake, which was always my motivation. The door opened and there stood Cool G Rap, an old school rapper. I didn't know who he was. I only knew his name because that's how he was introduced. I wasn't that into rap and had never heard any of his music, and his face was not familiar. My first impression was that he was unattractive. I could barely stand to look at him, but he was charming and funny, and within no time made me feel very comfortable. I cannot recall a lot of what happened that night, but I do know I never danced for him. There was something about Cool G Rap, or G as I started calling him, that made me feel protected. It may have been his 280-pound frame or reassuring bass in his voice. I'm not sure what it was or if it was anything at all, but I stayed the night. He was 37 at the time, and little did he know I was only 17. The very next morning, I awakened by the sound of his booming voice, laced with his trademark list. Hey, what's your name again? He asked me. My eyes were barely open and I could hardly remember who or where I was. I gave him the name I had been using as an answer, Yazette Santiago, since I was 16. It seemed plausible because I had the state ID, social security card, and W-2s to prove it, and they all stated that I was 21 years old. Once I got myself together, I realized that G was on the phone with an airline booking tickets to New York for later that night for us. You're staying with me, he said. You're going to be my wife. Though our union would not be legal because I was a minor and not truthfully Izette Santiago, from the day on, I was his wife in every way. But there was something else he wanted. He begged me and even ordered me to call him Daddy. I refused over and over again. I was strong then. I had been on my own for a while, making my own money. It was difficult for me to let anyone tell me what to do, even more difficult for me to give someone a title of authority. But somehow, some way, I finally broke down and said it. It drove him wild. Once we hit New York, we found ourselves at his manager, Chuck's Upper East Side Manhattan apartment, love. It was the dead of winter and the room was ice cold. The sounds of the city swirled below. The blaring horns, taxi cabs, and the ear-piercing whistles of people trying to catch them. There was heavy snow on the ground, and I could hear the tires of the cars below the grinding into it. I missed the city, and there was nothing sweeter than having sex in it. Just as he was close to orgasms, I yelled out, F me, daddy, and then looked in his eyes and told it all. He was hooked. 2 weeks later, we were back in Arizona. We lived in a posh new neighborhood in a 2,500 square foot, 4-bedroom house on about an acre of land. The first and the second shorties were connected by a grand spiraling staircase, and the house was blessed with skylights throughout it. It wasn't as large as the mansions I had become accustomed to while dating and sometimes living with professional athletes, but it was beautiful. I was beginning to become used to my new home and all the roles that G insisted upon. He had a definite way of doing things, and most importantly, a definite way he wanted me to do things. We bumped heads almost immediately. The first time G hit me, I should have left him. He had been on the phone with another woman. While he spoke on The handset downstairs. I went upstairs and unplugged the bass from the wall. I found his behavior disrespectful and had had enough of it. It wasn't the first time I'd caught him talking to other women. Sometimes he'd talk to them all day and he didn't seem to care if I knew or not. He'd be on the phone for hours on end with woman after woman without saying a word to me. Yet I was expected to cook 4 times a day, clean the entire house, and do laundry. On the day I disconnected his phone call, I heard his heavy footsteps storming up the staircase. I had a smirk on my face, expecting a bit of confrontation and a quick resolve, but that is not what he had in mind. As I sat on the edge of the bed waiting for the argument, which I was sure I would win, he entered the room from the right and stood directly in front of me, and with his left hand slapped me off the bed and onto the floor. It hadn't been the first time I had been hit. From my mother to boyfriends in high school and even a recent boyfriend before I met G. As a matter of fact, I had come to expect it. So there we were. I was the wife of a man who insisted I call him daddy, who chastised me as if he were my real daddy, who gave me rules and boundaries I'd longed for, and the order and responsibility I had been lacking, all the while ruling me over with an iron fist, literally. From the first slap to the face, I was subservient, which was just the way he wanted me. I should have left. I should have grabbed my things and headed out the door. After all, I barely knew him and had been on my own before. But I was tired of running. I had nowhere else to go. My father had already told me that I could never come back to his house. That was the rule for all his children. Once you're out, you may never come back. No matter what, I didn't want to be a stripper anymore. I've grown tired of the late nights and gawking men and had been desperate for a way out. G gave me that out. He gave me a home, and soon his family became my family. His sisters and brothers became my own, and I spoke to his mother, who I had began to call mom every day. I hadn't spoken to my own mother in years. Admittedly, I stayed with G for all the wrong reasons, and our relationships would only go bad to worse. G did, however, shower me with gifts and trips during the first few months of our relationships. I was only a teenager and hadn't learned a lot about the finer things in life. While I had been around some of the wealthiest men in the city, I was still very much a tomboy. Since high school, I had been dressing in oversized boy clothes and never left home wearing anything but sneakers and a toting backpack. I was not as worldly as I would have liked to believe I was. And G was the first to open that door for me. He taught me about perfumes and purses, changing my habit of wearing his cologne to having the best of Chanel and Versace pure perfumes, and switching my dirty backpack with the latest Dooney and Burke and Coach bags. He educated me on the cut, color, and clarity of diamonds and the most precious of stones. We ate well every day, lobster tails, colossal shrimp, and the choicest cuts of beef and lamb. We ate well, okay. We drank Cristal champagne with our orange juice in the morning, and all throughout the day, I was made to ditch my oversized jeans and tees for dresses and skirt ensembles. G taught me a lot about being a woman, he taught me to be an unsure, but he taught me to be an unsure and abused one too. Amid of all the perks of being with one of the most renowned pioneers of rap were a number of disadvantages and dangers. I was not allowed to wear makeup and was not allowed to do anything too dramatic to my hair. All of my dresses and skirts, though feminine, had to be loose fitting and past my knee. I was also not allowed to talk to any of my friends on the phone, and if I did, he would become angry or even jealous because I was giving attention to someone other than him. The beatings continued and worsened as the time went on. Once I prepared a lunch of shrimp and linguine and made the horrible mistakes of leaving the tails on the shrimps. In my mind, that's the way they had always been served to me in restaurants, and saw no harm in offering the shrimp to him in this manner. Along with the knife to remove the tails, I served G his favorite dish and proudly retreated to the kitchen with the who I began to call mom every day. I hadn't spoken to my own mother in years. Admittedly, I stayed, okay, no, that was the wrong thing. Where am I at? Oh, this is the last page. Um, Kitchen with a slight smile on my face. The rule was always serve him first and then go back and serve myself. But as I loaded pasta on my plate, G let out one of the many taunts to which I had become accustomed to. Yo, what the F is the matter with you? Who the F leaves tails on effing shrimp? He ordered me to cut his tails off the shrimp and remake his plate. Trembling and praying that I would do it right this time, I scraped the unused portion of his lunch back into the pot and began to remove the tails from the shrimp. Before reserving him on a new plate, I was sure that I had gotten it right this time and would be spared his wrath. Again, he yelled and called me stupid and worthless. I didn't understand. I had done what he asked. As I stood up in the kitchen, clutching my nervous stomach, he rose from his seat and walked toward me with his plate in hand. He rested his plate next to me on the counter with his right hand, and just soon as he did, he slapped me with his left. Stupid effing B. What the F is wrong with you? He screamed over me as I picked myself off the floor. I still didn't understand, even after he explained. When he received the first plate, for some reason he didn't see the tails on the shrimp before he began eating them. Once he noticed the scaly crunching in his mouth, he spit the food back into the plate. When I went to make him a fresh plate, I scraped the food back into the plate into the pot to keep it warm, while I picked all the shrimp and cut off the tails, and then reserved the same linguine and shrimp he had spit out. And simply mistake would set him off. It didn't take much. Chapter 6. The beginning of the end. Within the first 4 months of my relationship with G, I had lost 40 pounds and weighed a pitiful 96 pounds. The stress of physical and verbal abuse had taken a toll on my body and spirit. G called me skinny and ugly and had no problem telling me how unattractive I was to him since the weight loss. Life at our house was torture. It was common to see me with bruises up and down my body. His ex-girlfriend would come by the house, and even though she hated me, she sometimes cried at the sight of my emaciated, bruised, and swollen body. Still, I protected him. On an occasion, we were playing a video game in the living room. He was sitting on one of the couches and I was on the other. During the game, he began to call me a stupid bee. G had a way of looking at me with disgust and that turned my stomach. And sometimes I would just throw up at the outset of an argument. He gave me the look, and at that moment, I tried to be brave and fight back. I wanted to be tough, just as he had been to me. I wanted to let him know that I too was a force to be reckoned with. But all I could do was throw the game controller at him. It landed slightly on his lap, but it wouldn't have mattered if it hadn't hit him at all. That I showed any kind of mutiny was a reason enough for what happened next. Within seconds, he rose from his seat and punched me in my right side. It must have been a kidney punch, the type that the boxers receive, because my body crippled to the floor. I was unable to stretch out. My organs had shut down and I couldn't breathe. I was suffocating. If he had hit me one more time, I feared I would die. I tried to speak out, but I couldn't breathe. I was barely able to get the words out, I can't breathe. All of a sudden, he stood over me with his balled fist up and his anger turned to fright. He picked my stiff body up off the floor and tried to administer CPR, then opened the front door and began to yell to the street for help. I could hear him screaming, "Oh my God, help me." In the waning consciousness, I began to feel sorry for him and less concerned for me. One of our neighbors was a nurse and she administered CPR. The ambulance arrived a few minutes later. Once I arrived at the hospital, the nurses and doctor asked me how I cracked my ribs. G answered for me. She was running and tripped over the chair. When the nurse was alone with me, she inspected my bruised side. I knew she didn't believe G's version of the story, especially because There was no evidence of an imprint. There was evidence of an imprint of his fist, but I backed up his story. I protected my daddy. It was as if I suffered from a case of Stockholm syndrome, during which the hostage somehow becomes enamored with the captor and even begins to identify with the captor as a defensive mechanism, born out of fear and violence. Even the smallest acts of kindness by the captor are magnified. These symptoms occur under tremendous emotional and often physical duress. This behavior is considered a common survival strategy for victims of interpersonal abuse and had been observed in battered spouses and abused children. Though I need to get out of this dangerous, extremely unhealthy relationship, I sided with G and returned to that house. Once he returned home from the hospital, I found it hard to even walk. I turned on the water in our glass in shower as if he lit the fire in the adjacent double side fireplace. Sharp paint ran all through my body, and I stood under the water. I began to cry as I realized that I could not raise my hands to wash myself. I was broken and couldn't even get myself to clean. G heard my sobs, and in a charming way, he disrobed and joined me in the shower. He hurt me, then made it all better as he washed me gently and showered me with kisses and repeatedly whispered, "I love you." Still, the abuse continued. I was not allowed to check the mailbox after a while because he thought I was seeing someone around the corner where the community mailboxes were located. I was also not allowed to learn how to drive or hold a job or to further my education beyond receiving my GED. On the few occasions when I got employment at the local mall, he called my job constantly and frequently called home, feeling guilty for leaving him alone. It wasn't unusual for him to say, "I need you, come home." It was common for me to run back to him rather than moving toward gaining my independence. One day, I woke up and decided I didn't want to live like this anymore. In fact, I didn't want to live. I took a full bottle of prescription painkillers and was rushed to the hospital, where they made me drink charcoal and to neutralize the effects of medicine. There were times when I locked myself in a closet with G's gun, playing with the barrel and trigger, wanting to shoot myself, hesitating only because I was afraid of the pain. I wanted out of my life, one way or another. Living with one of hip hop's pioneers, I started to get lost in the new world of hip hop and the glorious videos accompanying the latest hot singles. I looked enviously at the women in those videos, their bodies perfectly voluptuous, while mine was gaunt and disgusting. Their faces were all made up and mine was plain. The only the shine of lip balm on my lips. Their clothes were tight-fitting and mine were hung loosely from my stick-like frame. I wanted to be there, wherever they were. It was my greatest wish to become beautiful and strong. G would become very upset with me if I liked someone else's music too much. He would take another artist's success as a reminder of his own increasing irrelevance. Cool G rap began and sustained his career in the 80s and into the early 90s. He also began dubbed one of his hip hop's most revered pioneers. Yet he had not been as successful or recognized as many of his counterparts. It is easy for some to remember Big Daddy Kane, Biz Markie, Rakim, artists who enjoyed more mainstream success, but G stayed more underground, rarely finding himself on MTV, as his protege Nas did. When we were together, it appeared that his peers and even his students would surpass him. His most popular singles like Streets of New York and something about Ill Street Blues, and Road to Riches are rarely ever heard outside of East Coast tri-state area. He was big at the time when there was no SoundScan, the tool that is used to track record sales. He never had the privilege of knowing just how many records he had sold, whereas his younger counterparts were going platinum plus in the mid to late 90s. The sense of failure or incompletion. I believe that is what fueled G's rage at times. And I would find myself watching videos when he wasn't around so that I could not make him angry while I was dreaming of a life. For now, I would remain in the nightmare called my life. There were multiple abortions and miscarriages. I'd reached the end of my rope. I staggered to the bathroom and after locking the door behind me, fell to my knees and continued to cry over the toilet. I prayed to God to save me. I begged him to give me a child who would be strong enough to live inside me and endure the abuse. I promised him that if he would answer my prayer, it would be my motivation to leave. My existence alone was not enough. I needed another reason to save my life. I knew that having a child would bring me back to the health to give me the strength to live without G. I prayed to God for the chance. Later that night, my son was conceived. Before too long, G and I were at it again. I can't remember what the fight was about, but in the midst of him kicking me out of the house yet again, I blurted, "I'm pregnant." And his response was, "Bitch, I don't care. Get out." So I did. I stayed with my friend for the next 2 weeks until G allowed me to come back home. I was made to sleep in the guest room on the floor with just one blanket and one pillow. Thank you. Yes, it's a good book. It's um Confessions of a Video Vixen. Wasn't allowed in the master suite at any time during the day unless I had been summoned to have sex with him. It was mostly oral sex. He called it my apology. G would stroke the back of my head and say things like, "That's right, show daddy how sorry you are. Apologize to your daddy. Suck daddies, and daddy won't be mad at you no more." And that's what a good girl's supposed to do. He made me perform on him for up to 2 hours at a time. On one occasion, it went on so long my nose bled. It wasn't supposed to be my it was supposed to be my way of taking responsibility for whatever I had done to make him angry. It was always my fault, and I was always made to apologize. The pregnancy proved to be a difficult one. I was constantly sick and unable to even stand the sight of certain foods, especially meat. I was unable to keep anything down and continue to be underweight at the time when I should have been putting on weight for my baby's growth inside of me. I was also severely anemic and found it hard to get out of bed to shower, much less perform the daily household chores. Still, I was made to cook and clean and carry on as if everything was the same. The rule was that G should never have to cook his own meals or do anything else around the house as long as there is a woman living there. One day, we were in the midst of yet another battle when he had ordered me to leave the house. He packed up most of my things and had them waiting by the door. I was about 3 months pregnant at the time, and it was the middle of the night. I was crying and shaking and screaming out to him, "I have nowhere to go. Where will I go? It's 2 in the morning." His answer was for me to go to a shelter. So at his command, I thumbled through the yellow pages and found a shelter with an open bed that would pick me up from the house. I continued to cry and beg him to just let me sleep there, even offering to go back in the guest room and sleep on the floor. He denied me. Yet while I was waiting for the shelter to come get me, G had one more order to place that was for me to make him a steak. So I stood there making his steak, crying and shaking, still begging to stay. I became nauseous and began cooking and throwing up simultaneously. G's concern was not for my health or for the health of his unborn child, but that his steak would be burned. Just a few moments when I served him his plate and cooked steak, my ride was at the door. I was then hauled off to the homeless shelter in the seediest section of downtown Phoenix. My designer bags filled with designer clothes and shoes. There were about 10 other women in the room, which I was assigned. There was only one shower where up to 5 women could bathe at a time, with no curtain to shield their bodies from anyone walking by. I had only 20 cents in my purse and had managed to borrow a nickel from one of the homeless women who was a permanent resident of the shelter. With the 25 cents, I called one of my friends, Cicely, and she took me home with her the morning after I had arrived to the shelter. I was lucky I had somewhere to go. The other woman at the shelter had nothing. There was so much despair and hopelessness around me. I could feel the hopelessness. Eventually, I returned home to G and to all the awful and eventually I returned home to G to all of the awful things that came with living in his house. Throughout the rest of my pregnancy, the abuse continued. During my 4th month, it became almost physically impossible for me to have sex. It was extremely painful and would make me nauseous. Still, that was no concern to G. And on many occasions, we had sex even when I didn't want to. He ignored my tears as I cried through each episode. I remember him yelling at me after sex because the crying made it difficult for him to reach an orgasm. Again, I was being a bad girl. As a result, oral sex became more prevalent in our relationship. My mouth and neck were in constant pain. There were no way I could refuse him. It got to a point where just the smell of his skin would make me throw up. I could not serve him anymore without making him feel unloved and unwanted. G would make me pay over and over again. In my 7th month of pregnancy, G had been called away to New York for work. Not long after his arrival in the city, I was awakened by a call from one of his friends. G had a grand mal seizure in the limo on the way from the airport. It wasn't his first seizure. The problem began many years before I met him. G had told me that he had a condition that required brain surgery. He also mentioned that on another occasion, he had been rushed to the hospital after he had been sniffing cocaine with one of his friends, singer Bobby Brown. From what I've been told, G had not been doing any drugs at the time of his seizure in the limo. He told me that the last time he did cocaine was actually just a few weeks after we met. The he yeah, the cocaine was given to him by an assistant of one of the NFL friends, a linebacker with whom G had also became friends. Not knowing of my past sexual relationship with the athlete. Oh, several hours after I received the phone call from G's teacher, I got on a flight and was in upstate New York to check G out of the hospital. His neck was sore and he had bitten his tongue, which was swollen and tender. It softened my heart to see him so fragile. It was the first time I had ever seen him actually need me. I held his hand and helped him out of bed. I helped him get dressed and put on his shoes. We walked out together. Anything that had gone wrong in our relationship was no longer a factor. Over the next 2 weeks, G and I stayed with his mother, Hanifa, in the South Ozone Park section of Queens, New York. The house was a disaster. There were roaches everywhere and everything was falling apart. I'd lived in less modern, less desirable places during my life, but I had never seen anyone living in these type of shambles. I was shocked thinking about how well G and I lived in comparison to his own mother. Still, I loved being there with his mother and the rest of his family. G's mother and I slept in the same bed. She would place her hands on my stomach and feel my son moving. She would cry and talk to him in her sweet, tiny voice. G was away from the house in the recording studio for most of our day there. So his mother and I lay in bed, watching The Young and the Restless, game shows and talk shows. She was extremely ill and frequently had to use a wheelchair to get around. She needed help getting out of bed and down the stairs. She had many pains in her life, but her son and our unborn baby brought her renewed joy. For the most part, things were going well at this time. G and I had not fought in a while and were getting along, but the peace in our lives was only temporary. One day, while G and I showered together, he said, I think we need another woman. I think we need another woman to take your place since you can't F properly. I was appalled. The look on his face was almost innocent, as if he saw no wrong in what he had just told his pregnant wife. I blew up and jumped out the shower. He followed me around the house, and I yelled, and he yelled back. I couldn't understand. He made it seem as if it was all my fault that because of me, he had to have another woman. The fight continued downstairs, where his mother sat in the wheelchair. What the hell is going on? She asked in a loud voice she couldn't muster. She she worked herself out of her chair and began to confront her son. I had worked myself into hyperventilation and served severe cramps. Without much warning, I collapsed and his poor sick mother tried her best to hold me up when she herself should have been in her wheelchair. G again was not concerned about either of us, stormed out of the house. I could never win with him, and no matter how much wrong he had, his mother would never completely side against her son. How could she? What's more, his mother needed G more than I did. He was the only breadwinner in the family, and everyone depended on him for support. G suffered another seizure once we returned to Arizona. He had stopped taking the Tegretol that had been prescribed by his doctor to help control his seizures. He said that taking the medicine made him feel like less of a man. During the first week of January 1988, his seizures returned. I was 9 months pregnant at the time. G had been in the hallway bathroom, and while he was sitting on the toilet, the seizure hit. I heard him falling off the toilet and shaking against the tub. I jumped out of bed and ran into his side. His eyes were rolled back to his head, and his tongue was hanging out and locked between his teeth. I called 911, grabbed his Tetragal bottle and called his mother, and unlocked the front door, then ran back to wipe his ass, flush the toilet, and pull up his boxers so that he would not be embarrassed when the ambulance arrived. Once they had him on a gurney, I got dressed and grabbed a set of clean clothes for him to wear when he left the hospital to return home. All of this was done in a matter of minutes. No matter the abuse and trauma I suffered on his watch, I still took care of him. Over the next 2 weeks, I nursed G back to health. He had a cocktail of medicines which had been administered every 3 hours or so. I made sure he took all of them on time, even in the middle of the night. I would set my alarm clock to wake me up at 11 and at 2 and 5 in the morning. I ignored my pregnancy needs at the time to be sure to get him well. I would rub his neck and shoulders every few hours, for they have been severely injured during the seizures. Soon, G fully recovered, and within a few days of his recovery, we were back in the hospital to welcome our baby boy. On January 17th, 1998, I went into labor. On that day, I stayed home and counted my contractions. By the next morning, the pain was unbearable, so we checked into the Thunderbird Samaritan Hospital. G stayed with me every second. He supported me fully and was the charming and loving man I knew him to be from time to time. I was just 19 years old, and for the next 24 hours, I continued to be overwhelmed with pain until finally, 51 hours into my labor, my son was born. After almost 3 full days in the legal limit of my 5 epidurals, I was exhausted. G seemed to be excited and jumped around the room taking pictures. I couldn't physically feel the moment that my son was born, but as I pushed, I focused on G's face as he winked at me to check to see if I was all right. I winked back at a signal that everything was fine. Indeed, the most amazing thing was happening to me. As a man who was being delivered from my body The love I thought I felt for G automatically transferred to the man in my life. And from that moment at 12:11 on the afternoon of January 19th, 1998, I no longer loved Cool G Rap. Okay, we're going to end it there. We are on chapter 7. It's getting good. I remember that part about Cool G Rap and being abusive to her. I definitely remember that part. But tragedy, 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 tragedy. All right, y'all. We'll be back probably tomorrow for the next 2 chapters.